You know what? Over the course of the time I've been doing these WTF videos, there's a recurring kind of theme with it. Alright? They have a rise and a fall. Alright? The rise is normally starting from quite early on, and the fall just kind of happens. Right? That this guy I'm going to talk about right here in this video, he kind of just came about. I didn't really do anything, and then all of a sudden just kind of decided to jump onto the world scene, got onto the world scene, and then made some very, very poor decisions, which led to him having an underachieved career. Alright? Person I'm talking about is Kell Brook. Right? Now, lads, we've done 2 of these already. It's the 3rd video I'm going to be doing here. You know what the title says. You know what this means. Right? However long this video may take. It may take 20 minutes. It may take half hour. It may take an hour. But we are going to be delving in to Kell Brook's resume. And we are going to be asking the question, lads. What the fuck happened to Kell Brook? As I do in these videos, I have a quick look, just a brief kind of look at the person's amateur career and at their background. Now, Kell Brook started boxing at the age of 12. Alright? He done some things as an amateur, but his amateur career really was just kind of there. He turned pro in 2004. Right? Now, he turned pro in Brendan Ingles' gym, the Witterbank gym up in Sheffield. Okay? By Dominic Ingles' own admission, Kell Brook growing up was kind of troubled, and you could see that in some of the things that have happened to him in his career. You know, outside of the ring, I should say, and some of the poor decisions he's made. He made poor decisions in the ring, but outside of the ring as well. You know, early on in Kell Brook's career, right, I think he was only a couple of fights in, he was actually stabbed. He was stabbed, I believe it was in a nightclub in Sheffield. Now, the stabbing he received in Tenerife way back in 2014, that I have heard about, and I've heard about the reasons for that. I'll touch on this later on in this video. That one there, I think it was 2006, 2007. I'm not as privy to that. I assume it was for the same thing. I would just imagine it was for the same thing as the 2014 one. But you see Kell Brook, outside of the ring, you could see he still had like those little tendencies just to get into a bit of trouble. You could see that in his career. You could see it in the way he wouldn't keep himself in shape pretty much throughout his whole career. I mean, Kell Brook, for many of his early fights, if you go on BoxRec and you check the weights, the fluctuation in between weights is actually quite strange, because he's coming in for certain fights at welterweight, he's coming in below welterweight at certain fights. I mean, I think one fight he was 137 pounds, nearly lightweight, right? So Kell Brook with the weights, there was a lot of kind of on and off with the weights. I mean, like the fight he weighed in, I think 137 pounds, the next fight he was 155 pounds. So you can see how Kell Brook's weight were fluctuating. Now, early on in Kell Brook's career, he really wasn't doing much. Like, he turned pro, you know, bit of hype around him, but he really didn't do much. You know, he was fighting a hell of a lot of journeymen. There was a lot of poor matchmaking with Kell Brook. When I say poor matchmaking, it was almost like they were unwilling to step him up. There's a guy, put it like this, right? A lot of people in boxing want trilogies. Right, you see a lot of fighters say they want a trilogy with this fighter. You see fans saying they want trilogies. Do you know Kell Brook has had a trilogy in his career? Did you know that? He had a trilogy with Ernie Smith. Yeah, there it is on screen. That's the guy Kell Brook's had a trilogy with. He even worse, right? He fought Ernie Smith in 4 fights. He fought Ernie Smith 3 of those times. They recycled him, I think, repeatedly. Alright, and over the course of Kell Brook's career, he's gone 16 rounds in the ring with this guy. They were on Frank Warren shows. I know at least 2 of them were. I think the first one wasn't. But that, to me, is quite poor matchmaking when you look at it in hindsight. Because it's obviously shown that they don't know where to go with this guy. They're just bringing the same opponent in over and over again. What are you learning from fighting the same journeyman 3 times? 3 times out of 4 fights. What are you really learning from that? So it kind of shows that they were like bringing Kell Brook very, very slowly along. This wasn't like out in the yard where they're bringing him slowly along because he had no real amateur background. Kell Brook did. It was just beggars belief as to why they were bringing him on so slow. He did eventually, you know, get to British level, and he proved himself to be a level above British level. Was when he fought Barry Jones. No, not that Barry Jones. Not that Barry Jones at all. He beat this Barry Jones. There you go. He beat that Barry Jones for the British title. Alright. Now, Kell Brook, he defended that British title multiple times. But he won it outright. So Kell Brook won that British title outright. Okay. It culminated in a fight with Michael Jennings. Right. Michael Jennings was for the British title. Right. Kell Brook had already won it outright at that stage. But that was in 2010, by the way. That fight was also a WBO final eliminator. Alright, so Manny Pacquiao at the time would have been WBO champion. They never would have taken, in my opinion, the Manny Pacquiao fight in 2010 for Kell Brook. I wouldn't have even thought there would have been much fan interest in that, because Kell Brook was kind of just knocking around the British level. Manny Pacquiao in 2010 was the Manny Pacquiao. They were talking about Floyd Mayweather. But he fought Michael Jennings. I'll talk, because I know he fought another Michael as well, but he fought Michael Lomax, I believe it was. But he fought Michael Jennings. That was on Sky Box Office pay-per-view. I believe Nathan Cleverly headlined that pay-per-view. I mean, those were the days where a certain fish eyes was really reaching for the next Joe Calzaghe. Thought he found it in Nathan Cleverly. He sure as hell didn't. But that was really what Kell Brook was doing then. You know, people were getting kind of annoyed with that, because Kell Brook, you saw a little bit of potential in there, you know, but you also saw someone who, you could definitely tell outside the ring he was ill. You could definitely tell that boxing wasn't his main focus. Whatever it was outside of boxing wasn't his main focus. You could tell it back then, but you could also tell that this guy, at least at British level at the time, you're talking 10 years ago now, he was a level above it. But remember, he'd been pro for a while now. Alright, he'd been pro for a while. He'd been pro for about 6 years, and he'd only just really kind of started just to kind of make moves and try and get himself into the world level picture. Not long after he fought Michael Jennings, he parted ways with Frank Warren. Now, with Frank Warren, it's very rarely amicable, and it wasn't on this occasion. There's contrasting stories. You have Frank Warren, who says that Kell Brook's dad was impossible to work with because he kept wanting, you know, X, Y, Z. You hear the Brook side of the story, where it was just like Frank Warren couldn't get the fights made. Look, I don't know. I'm not privy to it. I mean, it seems to be a recurring theme with Frank Warren that he can't get the big fights made. But this was 10 years ago. Back 10 years ago, Frank Warren was the guy in Britain, because Matchroom, I think, was still being run by Barry Hearn, and it wasn't the force it is now. I mean, as I said, Frank Warren done that fight on Sky, with the Michael Jennings fight on Sky pay-per-view, with Nathan Cleverly headlining it. So obviously he still had the Sky Sports gig at the time. That's when Sky Sports were doing, you know, work with loads of different promoters. Frank Warren was the main guy in the UK, so he had a bit more sway with boxing than he does today. Anyway, what eventually happened was that Kell Brook ended up parting ways with Frank Warren, and he went to Eddie Hearn. Alright, he was one of the first, like, with Eddie Hearn, Sky Sports, he was one of the original guys. There was like Tommy Coyle, there was Carl Froch, there was Kell Brook. I think that was really kind of it, really, when you look at it. They were the guys who were helping to bring Matchroom forward. You know, they were the guys who were starting this new crop of talent with Matchroom. Eddie Hearn was trying his best. You know, he got at work on Sky Sports, eventually got the exclusive deal. Kell Brook, as Eddie Hearn will tell you, was one of the original guys. He was one of the original guys to work with Eddie Hearn, as I said, along with Carl Froch, Tommy Coyle, guys like that. Kell Brook was part of that stable. Alright, Kell Brook made his Matchroom debut. Alright, he fought a guy called Lovemore Ndu. Alright, that fight went the distance. Lovemore Ndu, very, very, very tough man. Kell Brook ended up going the distance with him. Again, though, there was still a lot of people saying they wanted to see Kell Brook step up. You really knew that Kell Brook, we were hearing stories back then that Kell Brook wasn't living the lifestyle. You know, that he was, you know, camp for him was more about getting the weight off than it was, you know, sharpening your steel. You know, steel sharpens steel. He wasn't doing it. It was more about get the weight off and then get a bit of boxing in there, and then we're good to go. That was really kind of how Kell Brook went with it, you know. It was also around this time, it was then we started to see Kell Brook start mentioning the name Amir Khan. Because in around 2011, around that time, Amir Khan was probably, not only was he one of the best fighters in Britain pound for pound, but he was probably the best 140 pounder at the time, because he hadn't lost Danny Garcia. I don't think at the time when they done that ringside show where they had Kell Brook and Amir Khan on it, I don't think he'd lost to Lamont Peterson at the time when they done that ringside special. And for those who don't know what ringside is, ringside was basically a weekly boxing show. It's essentially basically what you would go to before IFL and Boxing Social came about. They'd get the fighters on. I think Adam Smith and Matthew Macklin, or maybe it was Johnny Nelson, would interview the fighters. Obviously with IFL, with Boxing Social, with people like that, that kind of made ringside irrelevant. And I think after 2016, ringside just went to the went into the annals of history. But they were on that ringside show, and you could tell Kell Brook wanted that Amir Khan fight, but Amir Khan obviously felt that him fighting Kell Brook, because Kell Brook at the time, as I said, he'd done absolutely zilch at world level. Yeah, he cleaned up at British level, but Amir Khan was coming off wins over Marcus Maidana. He beaten Paulie Malignaggi. I think at the time he was going to fight Lamont Peterson. He was the man at 140 pounds. All right, there was talk of him moving up to 147, but at the time it was Amir Khan. He was the man. All right, he was the guy. So for Amir Khan to look at Kell Brook wanting to fight with him, it made no sense for Amir Khan, because this is a British level fighter at the time. Why am I going to fight him? He brings nothing to the table, not much in the way of fanfare, no title, alright, and he's a welterweight. So with Amir Khan, you always knew that there was a rivalry there. Rivalry was starting to build, and Amir Khan having a massive ego, you got the impression that he would hate anyone to challenge that. So you kind of wanted to watch that and just see how would it simmer. Alright, Kell Brook then really, and I mean really, he had a big scare in his next fight. He had a very, very, very big scare. Alright, and this was kind of a wake-up call for Kell Brook. This was a big wake-up call for Kell Brook, because he fought Carson Jones. Now, Carson Jones has fought several prospects with Matchroom over the years, right? But at this time, Kell Brook was seen as a bit of a stepping stone. Alright, bigger and better things await. Kell Brook fought Carson Jones. And if you go watch that fight, for the first 6 rounds, like clockwork. Literally, Kell Brook boxing Carson Jones like clockwork, no issues whatsoever. Looked like he might even be able to force a stoppage. But this was one of the occasions where Kell Brook's discipline, or lack thereof, came back to bite him. Came back to bite him because after about 7 rounds, he really had nothing left in the tank. And this also showed that if you're a pressure fighter and you can pressure effectively, you can have a lot of success against Kell Brook. Alright, you can have a hell of a lot of success against Kell Brook, because Kell Brook struggled late on in that fight. He got the decision. It was a close fight. It was a majority decision, but he got the decision nonetheless. Now, he did rematch Carson Jones. This fight was more clinical, right? He got rid of the guy in, I think he got rid of 8 rounds. And this is when Kell Brook really started to look at nutrition. He really started to take his career a little bit more serious than he had. That Carson Jones fight was a wake-up call, because, as I said, at British level, Kell Brook had everything his own way. Alright, at British level, domestic level, even European level, Kell Brook really had everything his own way. He didn't necessarily need to be the most disciplined fighter, because he was just levels above these guys at British level at the time. But you go with Carson Jones, who at the time would have been fringe world level. He would have been fringe world level. So he was able to go in there, get rid of Carson Jones in the rematch, and then he fought Vyacheslav Shanchenko. Right, this was in 2012. Now, Vyacheslav Shanchenko was probably the best name at the time on Kell Brook's resume. There have been fights talked about. There have been tough fights talked about with guys like Mike Jones over in America. Mike Jones at the time was a decent fighter. There was also Devin Alexander. I remember Kell Brook twice he pulled out of that fight. He had a fight with Devin Alexander set, I think it was in 2011. Twice he pulled out of that fight. The third time it was scheduled, it was actually Alexander who pulled out of that fight. Alexander, as we all know, went on to fight Amir Khan and was one of Amir Khan's best performances, actually, when he fought Amir Khan, was comprehensively beaten by Amir Khan. But Kell Brook went in there against Shevchenko. Alright, Shevchenko coming off a win over Ricky Hatton at the time. Alright, former world champion. He'd only lost to Paulie Malignaggi, not long prior to that, or not long after that, I should say. But he was coming off a win over Ricky Hatton. He buzzed Kell Brook a little in that fight. I think he buzzed him in the 3rd round. But Kell Brook was calm, composed, was methodical, and he got rid of Shevchenko in the 4th round. He was pretty much a clockwork-like performance from Kell Brook, and that catapulted him to the world stage. He had one fight after that, but then it was 2014. Then it was a crack at the IBF World Welterweight Champion. It was a crack at Showtime Sean Porter. Now, Showtime Sean Porter, right? Very, very, very good fighter. Alright, and we'll talk about this fight, right? Kell Brook went in there. A lot of people were picking Sean, and especially because this fight was in Carson, California. A lot of people were picking Sean Porter to win this fight. Alright, I really, at the time, was kind of on the fence, because, yeah, I liked watching Sean Porter fight. I thought he was good. I knew Kell Brook on his day could be a good fighter, but it was just like, will all the pieces fit? And how will he cope with being, away from home? Because he has fought in America before, but at this level, how will he cope? Well, he coped just fine. It was a majority decision. He beat Sean Porter, and some people said it was close. It could have gone either way. I thought the right man won. I thought Kell Brook done a very good job on Sean Porter, and I think that in the grand scheme of things, the job Kell Brook did on Sean Porter was better than Keith Thurman, much better than what Keith Thurman did 2 years later, and was much better than what Errol Spence did however many years later, 5 years later. So Kell Brook at that stage was really, that was his coming out party. You know, you really, and I say that, okay, that was poor choice of words, but that was his moment at world level for Kell Brook. That was where he really, all the stars aligned on Kell Brook, basically. Now, you would have thought that Kell Brook would take that win, would take that world title, would chase the bigger fights. You think that he would be in immaculate shape all year round, that you'd have no issues with him whatsoever. Well now, not long after that, he was in Tenerife. This is really, in hindsight, this is really where the downfall starts. Never mind what happened in the subsequent years, but this is really the beginning of the end. There was an issue in Tenerife. Kell Brook got stabbed. See that little article on screen just there. Now, I've heard rumours as to why he was stabbed. Obviously, they're rumours, they're allegations. I ain't going to touch on them too much on here. I ain't going to say that these are true. I have heard several rumours. They've all, well, I say rumours, they're all the same story, but from different people. It was not a good look coming off the best win of your career to have an issue like that. But we'll put it to one side. Kell Brook stayed with Eddie Hearn, kept working with him. Eventually he had to make a defence of his title. First defence of his title. Now you kind of think to yourself, right, he's making a defence of his title. Right, Amir Khan's just coming off a win over Devin Alexander. Amir Khan's the guy you want to be targeting. You're going to, go and fight someone, really, really good and make Amir Khan take note, because he said if you win a world title, he'll fight you. You want to show that, I'm here. I'm ready to go. I'm fighting world level guys. I want you. Who am I going to fight? He's going to fight a guy. He's going to fight Jojo Dan. Yeah. Jojo Dan. To be fair, at the time it wasn't mandatory. IBF are known for poor mandatories from time to time. So look, we just tick that box. It moves on. And, a big fight for Kell Brook next. We're hearing pay-per-view next for Kell Brook. You seriously? We're hearing pay-per-view for Kell Brook next in his next fight in a big title defence. Now, lads, big title defence for Kell Brook. Who are we thinking of? We're going to be thinking of, welterweight, 2015. Could it be a unification with Keith Thurman? Could they get Tim Bradley over to the UK? Jesse Vargas, kind of guys like that. Really, really good. Who are they going to get? Frankie Gavin. That was pay-per-view. Yeah. Right, lads. Right. So he fought Frankie Gavin on pay-per-view. Right. Now, I'm just going to say it. A lot of people were not best pleased. Right. The undercard was kind of what it was. Had Anthony Joshua on it. Had Kevin Mitchell and Lee Selby. But still, a lot of people weren't happy about that fight being on pay-per-view. There was a big debate going as to whether this was even a pay-per-view fight. Was there even a debate? Let's ask Martin Brundle.
Well, it's a fairly short debate, Murray. End of message. 3 minutes to go.
Exactly. It was a fairly short debate. Kell Brook fought Frankie Gavin. Frankie Gavin, right, is a bit like Dave Allen, right? Although Frankie Gavin is technically better than Dave Allen, pound for pound anyway. In a sense, a talented guy, had a couple of opportunities here and there, never be arse to stay in shape. That's the story of, even in the amateurs, he couldn't stay in shape for fights. So that's the story of Frankie Gavin. Clockwork-like performance. Kell Brook got rid of him in, I think, 7 rounds. I mean, like, In terms of pay-per-view, had names like AJ on it, but realistically, it wasn't a great showing. Kell Brook he's making good money from these fights. He wasn't making serious money. He's actually meant to have a step up. He's meant to fight Diego Chavez. He was actually meant to fight him at the undercard of Tyson Fury versus Vladimir Klitschko. When that fight was originally announced, it was announced for October 28, I believe, and Kell Brook was set to feature on the undercard because this was being shown on Sky Box Office. Eddie Hearn had a bit of a sway in it. Although he wasn't working with Tyson Fury, it was still Mick Hennessy. He was screening this fight. But for whatever reason, that fight never materialised. It was actually shown on I think they even had a press conference. But for whatever reason, that fight never materialised. We never got to see Kell Brook that night. We actually didn't see him at all in 2015. The next time we'd see him will be in March 2016, where he made another mandatory defence of his IBF world title, this time against Kevin Bizier, of all people. I mean, that's 2 mandatories in a row where the IBF have really, really not done themselves any favours, and they've just given Kell Brook a who's he to defend his title against. I think he got rid of Bizier in 2 rounds. It was on Easter Sunday, or it was on Easter weekend, I should say. Interesting thing about that fight was the post-fight interview, because Kell Brook really was adamant that he wanted bigger fights. He wanted big names. One name, now bear in mind, this was a guy who just defended his 147-pound welterweight world title. Alright, and one of the names he threw out there, which kind of at the time, I remember watching that fight and hearing it thinking, he just chucked that name out for the sake of it. But he chucked out the name Triple G, Gennady Golovkin. Now at the time, as I said, I kind of just took that on board as a bit of the Triple G, you throw the name in there, but whatever. And then we get into the summer months. We're hearing unifications. The WBO welterweight champion Jesse Vargas. Jesse Vargas is a fighter who I never rated massively highly myself, to be honest with you. I just kind of thought he was okay, but he wasn't anything to write home about. I would have thought Kell Brook would have beaten him. We're hearing talks of unification, WBO title on the line. We're hearing 6 figures, the high 6 figures, to be paid out. Not too bad. But we also hear that Kell Brook's not too pleased with that. Yeah, he wants the unification, but 6 figures, he feels like it should be more than that. Then we get the announcement. Out of the blue. I remember seeing a poster. I used Facebook at the time, and I remember seeing a poster thinking it was photoshopped. Kell Brook, Gennady Golovkin, September 10th, Sky Box Office. It turned out to be true, because the Eubank Jr. fight fell through for Triple G. Kell Brook stepped in. It's going to be a 147-pounder going with the middleweight to fight, at the time, a pound-for-pound top 5. One of the best middleweights, the best middleweight in the world at the time, but one of the best over the last few years. Amir Khan had just fought for the WBC middleweight world title in May against Canelo and was brutally knocked out. These two had a rivalry going. You got the impression, was Kell Brook there because he wanted to compete with Amir Khan? Was he there because he wanted a big payday? Because this was going to be the biggest payday of his career. I think it was something like $4 million he was due to get. Was it a cash out? And should Kell Brook have really gone another direction? Was this a step too far? You hear people saying they've jumped the gun. Whether it be with a relationship or anything in life. You hear people say, who maybe things haven't gone their way, it's been like, I jumped the gun. I've done that in a few things in my life where I've jumped the gun and I've had egg on my face. But you kind of got the impression that Kell Brook jumped the gun. But I remember the build up to that. I remember the fight week specifically. Triple G arrived in the UK quite late. There was talk that he had the flu. This is back where you could still fight with that. And there was a few people were saying, could there be an upset? Is there an upset due? We're hearing Triple G is the flu. He's arrived in the UK late. Could there be an upset? We see Kell Brook on the scale looking very good. The check weights, he was actually heavier than Triple G in a lot of the check weights. So we kind of think, could Kell Brook do this? Now, I never thought he could. I thought that he'd be game. Maybe would take Triple G late, but would get broken down. This was a fight. This was a bridge too far. Well, in the fight, it was competitive. Brook, in the second round, was at his best. He was definitely hitting Triple G, but that was the thing. He was hitting Triple G a lot. They weren't having an effect. Triple G was just happy to take those shots from Kell Brook. Those shots that would be devastating at 147 pounds. Triple G, we know, iron chin. But even at 160, those shots wouldn't be bothering too many people. Yeah, they'd feel them, but they wouldn't be bothering them. And eventually Triple G broke Kell Brook down. Fractured his eye socket. I remember the towel came in from Dominic Ingle in the 5th round. And it wasn't like Kell Brook was taking a sustained beating. But I was a little bit surprised when it came in. When I heard about the eye socket, I understood completely then. And you started to think, right, it's not a great kind of path now you're taking. If you had gone the road less travelled, the longer road, could have led to greener pastures. If you had fought Jesse Vargas, could have led to greener pastures. Now, you're not a middleweight. There's not a great deal of opportunity at 154 pounds. If you want to go back down to 147 to defend your title, you're fighting Errol Spence next. The IBF gave you 2 handy mandatories, now they're giving you a serious one. What are you going to do? Eddie Hearn wants you to go to 154 pounds. I believe Dominic Ingle was also saying to Kell Brook he wanted to go 154 pounds. December 10th, 2016, there was meant to be a press conference. A lot of people thought it was actually going to be Kell Brook announced his move to 154 pounds, or he'd be actually re-signing with Frank Warren. Remember, that was a rumour that was going around doing the rumour mill. But we got none of that. We didn't get any announcement. What we did get an announcement was that Kell Brook was actually in a car crash, not long after the Golovkin, or subsequent to the Golovkin fight, I should say. Now, I've heard about this car crash. I heard that it was a guy driving an X5, BMW X5, and he hit a wall. I'm very reluctant to call crashes accidents, because accidents imply there's someone to blame, or there's no one to blame, which is why I've never called Errol Spence's crash an accident, because it was clearly his fault. Without going into too much detail, from what I've heard, I can't say the driver was necessarily at fault for this. There was things going on in that car that, if they were true, and these are allegations, I would have turned my head as well. And that was how the crash ended up happening. We'll leave it at that. But anyway, we go into 2017, and we do get the announcement. Kell Brook will drop back down to 147 pounds. He will fight Errol Spence at Bramall Lane, again on Sky pay-per-view. Now, obviously I wasn't doing this at the time, but I thought that this was... If you knew, I kind of thought to myself, if you know you're going to struggle to make the weight, if you know that realistically, win or lose, you're not going to be fighting at this weight anyway, and there's not really anything to gain from it, because Spence wasn't, a massive name at the time. Why are you taking this fight? For pride? Okay. So, he went in there against that Spence fight. 147 pounds. Now, some people, Eddie Hearn was saying he made weight comfortably. That's not what I heard. I heard different stories. Obviously, remember with the IBF, you have a 10-pound rehydration clause. Remember that? Starting off of that fight was very good for Kell Brook. Boxing Errol Spence very well. Winning the first half of the fight, landed some good shots in there. But with Errol Spence, you always knew stylistically he was dangerous for Kell Brook. Errol Spence could pressure Kell Brook, a good body puncher. If you've been struggling to make the weight, those body punches, they're going to show. And gradually, as the fight progressed and it wore down, you notice Kell Brook slowing down. You notice little things kind of going awry. You notice he was struggling a bit in there. In the 10th round, he ended up getting dropped by Errol Spence. Scorecards were kind of up in the air. Into the 11th round. And what happened? The eye. The other eye this time gets fractured. And Kell Brook was upset that the towel was thrown in the Triple G fight the first time. Voluntarily takes the knee in the 11th round and is counted out against Errol Spence. I don't begrudge him taking the knee. I don't begrudge him quitting. At the end of the day, he could have went blind. I don't begrudge him. Lost his IBF title, back-to-back losses. Did it need to happen? Did he need to go that path? I don't think he did, personally. And I think that this is where we're seeing this downfall kind of start to come. It was kind of like it's kind of like Kell Brook was like this, then he kind of went up briefly and then went back like that. That's kind of his career, where nothing really happened. Then he kind of went straight back down. I think after this fight, he was kicked off a plane because he was drunk or something like that in the toilet. I think that was reported in the media. So we saw, again, the side of Kell Brook come out that was not nice. The party side. The side that just wants to live the athlete's life for 3 months a year and then live the life he wants to live the rest of the 9 months. It's not sustainable. It's not sustainable to a long career. He moves up to 154 pounds. As a fight in March 2018. Looks alright. The guy he was fighting wasn't great. And he fights Michael Zarafa. Michael Zarafa was, well, he is a stripper. That's what he is. Kell Brook didn't look, well, it's just before Christmas. He didn't look particularly amazing in that fight. Seemed to be gassed a bit, but managed to go to 12 rounds, won every single round. In hindsight, seeing what Zarafa's done since then, it makes the win look better. At the time we were saying Kell Brook is done, but seeing what Zarafa did to Jeff Horn in both fights, you can kind of turn around and say, do you know what, actually it wasn't that bad. Yeah, Zarafa's useful, to be fair, but Kell Brook, the gas tank was he opened up on Zarafa early on in that fight, and it seemed like he had very, very little left after that. And then, nothing. Zip. Nothing. We didn't hear from Kell Brook at all. Now, again, I've heard stories as to why he was out of the ring for as long as he was. He was out of the ring for well over a year. Nothing I can confirm. All rumours. I ain't going to touch on them. But then we do get the announcement Kell Brook's coming back at 154 pounds. He's going to fight a guy called Mark DeLuca. And Mark DeLuca, again, a opponent who made Kell Brook look good. You know, he made Kell Brook look very good. Kell Brook went in there February this year, with a crowd, because it was February, and, you know, put on a show. Did what he needed to do. Wasn't a terrible card. You know, did what he needed to do. So we started saying, okay, one last hurrah for Kell Brook. Is he going to stay at 154, or what's he going to do? We hear the name Terence Crawford mentioned. I'm thinking, he ain't going back down to welterweight. No, he ain't going back down to welterweight. Then we start hearing, you know, Kell Brook staying in shape. Kell Brook's this, Kell Brook's that. Again, you can't expect to stay in shape in between fights for one camp when you've had several camps where you've not stayed in shape. It's not gonna right all those wrongs. We get the announcement for Crawford versus Brook. Okay, let's see what happens. Crawford has not looked as devastating at 147 as he has at 140 or 135. Kell Brook very big at that weight, but he hasn't made it in 3 years. But he is still big at the weight. He is still powerful. Let's see how this goes. What does Kell Brook have left? What does he have left? We got that answer in November this year. I've always liked Kell Brook. Always been a fan of him. But in that fight, it taught me that there was very little left. As you see there. 3 rounds was all it took. Crawford looked good doing it. He looked good doing it. You know, that was the quickest anyone's got rid of Kell Brook. The most clinical. And to me, that showed that Kell Brook isn't the fighter he once was. Well, we knew that, but he really has gone further than I think a lot of us expected. Which is sad. We get to the end of Kell Brook's career now. And when I say the end of Kell Brook's career, I'm not necessarily saying he's definitely going to retire. But in terms of the fights he's had, that's it. I've talked you through the majority of them. I've talked you through his resume. I've talked you from when he started off stagnant to when he got his rise to world level to when it all came crashing down. What do we take from this? Because I always try and take something from these W.T.F videos. I always try and give something. Do we say Kell Brook has achieved what his career potential had? Absolutely not. This is a man who had potential. Oh, he did. He had very much potential. There's also a man who had very poor discipline. Extremely poor. This was someone who, at world or elite level, for any fighter, it could be a case if you have 4 to 5 years at that level. At that level where you can get big fights, where you can maximize revenue, where you can really carve out a legacy for yourself. You need certain things. You need mental strength. You need good discipline. You need skill. Kell Brook had skill. Mentally, he was okay. Discipline. That was lacking. If you can keep yourself in shape all year round, live the lifestyle, when you finish up, whenever that may be, you have all the time in the world to do whatever you didn't do, whatever you couldn't do. But for those years, you want to try and maximize how good you are, how lethal you are in the ring. Kell Brook didn't do that. He was his own worst enemy. He chose, and as well, he also chose the wrong paths, as far as I'm concerned. As I said, Jesse Vargas would have paid less, but it could have led to greener pastures. Could have led to more paydays. I mean, lest we forget, Jesse Vargas didn't get a fight with Errol Spence, or didn't get a fight with Kell Brook. He ended up landing a fight with Pacquiao. That could have been Kell Brook in a unification with Pacquiao, because he would have had both titles, although Pacquiao probably wouldn't have one. But that could have been Spence, or that could have been Kell Brook. There was tournament fights there. He chose to go down the road of fighting Triple G. No one forced them. And subsequently, I think that damaged him. On top of not living the life outside of the ring. All these things snowball. All these things will catch up to you. And they did to Kell Brook. When I look at Kell Brook, I see someone who has reached world level, has won a world title. No one will ever take that away from Kell Brook. Fantastic achievement. Best win is Sean Porter. There was more there. There was more earnings there. There was more scalps there. There was more big nights. We'll never see the Amir Khan fight. That fight is gone. I wonder if Kell Brook had got some of those marquee names. If he had gone down the Jesse Vargas route, if he unified, if he had won a couple of titles, if he'd fought a key tournament and beat him, maybe picked up another title, or Danny Garcia, would he have got that Amir Khan fight that he craved? That fight could have sold Wembley years ago, in around the time of 2014, 15, 16. That would have paid more than the Triple G fight. It would have been a longer road, no doubt, but it would have been a road worth taking. I leave you with this. I always leave on a positive note. Kell Brook has done is he's created a life for him and his family. A good life. So whether he fights again or doesn't fight again, his family are set. His legacy is secure with his world title. He will never have to work a day in his life. I hope he doesn't have to. I hope he's smart with his money. In terms of everything else, there's not too much else I can say on the matter. We leave it there. We look at Kell Brook's career. We look at it with the benefit of hindsight. Hindsight, you should have done this. Hindsight, you should have done that. What's done is done. We can't change it. Kell Brook now, if he fights again, it'll be a goodbye fight. If he doesn't fight again, you did what you needed to do in your career. You took the fights. You've done your best. You've won you've won a lot of them. You've made your money. Fair due. Fair due. People, I love doing this. I'm going to leave it here. Smash the like button if you enjoyed it. Leave a comment down below on what you think. Let me know what fighter you think I should do next. Next month is January. Dry Jan. I have an idea of a fighter who was anything but dry. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below, lads. I'll talk to you. Hashtag G-Mans, Rocks, King of Rip Jeans, all that good stuff. Hope y'all enjoying your Christmas week. I'll talk to you, lads. Peace.